Hi, everyone. Just want to say good morning to our friends in the West and good evening to our friends here in Asia, India, and Far East. Today we are on a global stage. It doesn't really matter what time zone you're on. This is a pretty big evening for us. We're calling this our B2B evening. We've got two panels in quick succession. Dharmesh, who's below me on the screen, thanks for joining us early with your cup of coffee, Dharmesh, on your San Francisco morning. On my screen,
Thank you.
next to my right, Dharmesh is at Battery Ventures. Anant is the president of Microsoft India. Welcome, Anant. And we have Krishna Gopal, who's the founder and CEO of Mindtickle, dialing in from Pune, I think. Welcome, Krishna. And I want to also welcome all our listeners and guests to this B2B evening. And after about half an hour break, we're going to have another panel called the Consumerization of Enterprise. And this panel is about building scalable go-to-market strategy. So without much ado, I wanted to just spend, the format that we'll do is just some quick intros because you've got some fantastic panelists here, a very diverse panel. And we'll spend about maybe about 35, 40 minutes on Q&A, the core discussion. And then we'll leave about 10, 15 minutes for audience discussion. So we just get into it. I wanted to just briefly introduce my friend Anant Maheshwari here first. Anant is president at Microsoft India. He's been leading the charge as Microsoft's one of the most active markets ever since Satya took over. And we had the pleasure of actually meeting Satya. Anant, I want to say it feels like eons ago, but it was just last year. And thank you for that privilege. And Anant's been working, very closely on startup initiatives. You deal with a lot of India's unicorns, so we speak the same language. And it's also interesting to have a fellow Bitsin alumnus on the panel. So welcome, Anant. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me here, Sanjay. Thanks a lot.
Absolutely. Dharmesh, thanks for dialing in early on a Wednesday morning with a cup of coffee from Palo Alto. Dharmesh is a general partner at Battery Ventures, one of the leading global enterprise tech focused VC firms. Dharmesh has known Blume, has known Karthik and me, common Wharton alums, and he's known us before we started Blume. A lot of walking meetings around coffee on University Avenue in Palo Alto. Dharmesh, we'll have to wait for a bit till that comes back to normal. But Dharmesh has seen both sides. He's been an investor earlier with Intel, and then also had a lot of product and go-to-market roles before that. And has got a bunch of stellar investments, including Movidius, JFrog, Databricks, Gong, Colibra. So fantastic to have your macro investor lens. Thanks for joining us, Dharmesh.
Thanks for having me, Sanjay, and congrats on all you guys have accomplished, in the last 10 years. So thanks.
Thanks, Dharmesh. And then finally, we have, we always have to have a founder. Everybody's going to be candid, but I think to have Krishna from Mindtickle here to share more from a founder lens. We've got an enterprise hat, we've got a VC hat, and then from a founder hat. Krishna is the co-founder of Mindtickle, which is it's a leading sales and readiness enabled platform, raised amongst most recently a large round from SoftBank, so has done it all in that sense, and of course still building. And earlier, I believe, also worked with Microsoft, so that's an interesting connect that you share with Anant. And since this is our 10th year, all of us have some story going back 10 years ago. When you were raising your first round, Krishna, I remember we were between funds, and we had looked at it. We had met through the startup leadership program when you and Mohit came and talked to Karthik and me, and we, unfortunately couldn't come in. But wonderful to see how the story is unfolded. And thanks for joining us on this, symbolic and really important day and week.
Thank you so much, Sanjay, and congratulations on your 10 years. I think our journeys are tied together, almost started at the same time. So good to see your progress as well.
Thank you. Thank you, gentlemen. So, Anant, if I can start with you. We hear a lot about the new Microsoft, right, under Satya, which is, while it's a large enterprise, it's known for being very innovative, fast, and has a startup mindset. You all invested in Flipkart. You've got your corporate venture arm, M12 VC, and of course Azure. Would love to hear, what your startup lens is, right? How Satya and the leadership looks at this. You've talked about technology and trust, so would love to start off with that. From what Microsoft's lens is of the startup world, and what startups can expect as they're interacting and dealing with Microsoft.
So thank you so much, Sanjay. It's quite a broad question, so I'll try not to cover a lot of ground here. But maybe we can go and talk about 3 or 4 specific things. But what we do with startups is very similar to our broad approach in the market, and that is really governed by our mission to empower every person and every organization on the planet to achieve more. Now, that sounds like a mouthful in terms of words. So let me just convert that very quickly, maybe into startup language as to what does this mean. So what do we tell every person coming into Microsoft? We basically say, hey, listen, if you want to be cool yourself, then maybe Microsoft's not the best place. But if you want to make others look cool, then Microsoft's a great place for you. And that's kind of our value proposition for startups. We want to make the startups be cool. So that's really who we are as a company. And therefore, at our DNA is this focus of B2B, which is this clarity that for our business model, every company trusts us because they know whether you are a retail company or an e-commerce company, or whether you're in media and entertainment, or you're in fintech and financial world, or you are in logistics and transportation, or you may be in healthcare and so on, any industry. The industry can trust us, the player in the industry can trust us that we are not creating a business model on the side to come and compete with them. And that is, I think, a huge value proposition that we have created guardrails around, and we are very clear in enabling that capability, whether it's an enterprise or a startup. And that's why I think people trust us. Linked to that is the other frame of who we are as a company. Because if you just look at this 10-year history that Blume has had, and you go back to when you started, there were these very interesting industry nomenclatures from the IT industry about IaaS, PaaS, SaaS, and so on. 10 years later, these are irrelevant. Because at that time, 10 years back, people were moving from the on-prem world to the cloud world. Therefore, these made sense. But today, they don't. Today, the customer looks for a commercial cloud. And that's where, again, Microsoft becomes very relevant for them, because we offer the end-to-end portfolio to a startup as well as to an enterprise. And that, again, becomes a single place to work with data. And finally, I would say, I think we believe in a massive philosophy of your data is your data. And therefore, we will work with you to create that data loop for yourself. That again becomes a very long-term play for a startup where there's a lot of IP, there's a lot of data that you're working with. So to sum it up, if you have to ask me how Microsoft operates and how do we create that partnership, it's really thinking through this it's very simple equation of tech intensity. Every company is becoming a software company today. And tech intensity is very simply defining that trend line. It says you can take technology at scale from outside, you apply your own capability, which is your talent, and bring something unique. And then you create a business model that can be trusted by all. So tech intensity is really technology, talent, and trust. And that's where I think we really stand out in terms of working with the startup community. So and that's the lens that we bring in general to our business, and we are very consistent with that in the startup community also.
Very interesting, Anant. When you talk about you talked about technology and trust. In a sense, the analogy is so similar where it hits home. Where in our business, LPs are giving you capital, they trust you with that capital, and then you're looking for investment trends that you're identifying and then investing in tech startups, right? So it's a quite interesting value chain. We'll come back to you talk about value chains, back in a bit. Dharmesh, I wanted to cut over to you. You spent time at Intel and now Battery, and we saw recently quite an interesting report that you all authored, right? Some of your colleagues and partners, which is called the SaaS 2021 report. And would love for you to double click into, everybody, we talk about SaaS and enterprise being on fire. It's fantastic to see Freshworks now just cross the 300 mil ARR barrier. This is not a valuation barrier, right? It's a different benchmark. And would love to hear, from your perspective, we hear about expanding TAMs, for example. That's something that comes up in our conversations on what drove this report, right? What are the data points, the learnings that you've seen from the successful tech IPOs? If you could double click a bit into that, let's start with that macro view and then get into it. Would love to share.
Absolutely, Sanjay. So first and foremost, thanks for having us here. And Anand, great to hear from you on Microsoft. You guys have been a great partner for many of our companies, from Databricks and Gong to several others. So it's great to see that replicate in India as well. To your question, Sanjay, we issue a report twice a year. So in the springtime, we have the Software 2020-21 report. And in fall time, we issue this Open Cloud report, which is all about open source, cloud native companies, more infrastructure event. And it's really just to keep track of what's new in the market, because so much has changed, right? Between what happened 10 years ago and now, and even last year to where we're sitting now, where in April last year, we weren't quite sure where markets were going to go, how IT spending was going to be impacted. And then we woke up in September and we had 2 IPOs on the same day in September. We never expected that was going to happen. So there's so much that has happened over the last few years that we find it's good to capture that every 6 months and issue a report around what we see in the market. And because Badway is so focused on software, 95% of what we do is business-to-business software. Half is application, half is infrastructure. And we're a global fund, so we have presence in US, Europe, and Israel, hopefully in India too in the near future, where we try to find the best companies in the B2B space. Eventually, most of them go to the US market, where that's, 1/2 of the $2 trillion spent in IT is in the US. So no matter where you start, you end up in the US. And so by focusing on B2B software, we get to see a number of, kind of interesting macro trends that are developing, and we try to encapsulate that in the report. This specific report you're referring to, I think reflects on the performance of many companies like Snowflake, like Datadog, like Elastic, Okta, and many others. I get asked all the time, like, what's wrong with the market? Is it just hyperinflated valuations? Why are these companies trading at 30, 40x revenue multiples, and what's going on? And I'll kind of, at the very high level, the 3 things that we have observed at the fundamental level is that the markets that they operate in are significantly larger than they expected. Second, there are practitioners making decisions, not necessarily CIOs and top-down decision makers, which makes the sales cycle faster. And third, the way you sell has evolved in a way which is much more efficient. So when you grow your business, you can have much better profit margins at scale, right? So if I unravel those 3, the markets are much larger, which I think is the most distinct piece here. Most companies, over the last decade would get to 100, 150 million, and then growth would slow from, 60, 70% to 20, 30%. Because, most of the companies in B2B target the largest 8,000 companies in the world with more than $1 billion in revenue. And that TAM can only support so much growth. What we've seen in the last decade is, there's about 45,000 companies with, more than 500 employees and 50 million in revenue. They're much more active in the buying process. They don't have CIOs, but developers, product managers, they're buying software, they're practitioners buying software. And then you kind of have new markets, from plumbers and electricians to accountants that are also latching onto software, because distribution of software has become much easier through iPads and devices. So I think if you multiply all of them, markets end up being, 40, 50 billion versus 5 to 10 billion, which allows you to get to 300, 500 million and still continue to grow 40, 50%, right? In this report, we talked about 40 companies that are already at 500 million ARR and still growing, 30, 40%. And case in point, Microsoft Azure, Amazon Web Services are 70 billion collectively in revenue, still growing 40%. So the markets are a lot larger. Practitioners are buying things in, 3 to 4 weeks as opposed to 6 to 9 months. And the way you sell, which we can talk at some point, through premium, through open source, through cloud native approaches, allows you to generate a lot more profits over time. So when you're a 500 million business growing 50% and you can throw 30, 40% profit margins, to the bottom line, that results in a pretty attractive outcome. And that's why you see software companies, trading at 30 times, 40 times revenue, and, getting to 20, 30 billion in market cap. So that's kind of the biggest kind of trend we've seen. And over again, you see companies like Atlassian, MongoDB, Twilio, they're now close to 50 billion. And you say, hey, are these guys hitting the peak? And I think there's another decade for them to run, because each of these guys is still like 10% of the TAM, which happened to be like 10x what people expected. So let me pause there. We can dive into details, but that's the biggest takeaway: the larger TAMs, speed of purchasing, and efficiency of sales.
That's really interesting, Ramesh. Thanks for sharing that. B2B is a great reference point where I see a lot of stuff on Twitter now that talks about, forget expanding your teams, expand your TAM. And I think, B2B has been a good mechanism, right? Where you're seeing a lot of this. I wanted to just, cut over to Krishna. Krishna, I know you have some battery ventures reference as well, right? In your growth, we'll come back to that in a bit. Krishna, putting your, it's a really diverse panel, right? We have the enterprise hat, we've got the VC hat, the growth VC hat, and then your founder lens. Would love to hear, I remember when we met almost 10 years ago, 8 years ago, you were a gamified HR platform, right? I remember we invested in Metal at that time. And it's so interesting. Metal was our first investment. You talk about 10 years ago. So we're really talking about like a decade at a time. And today you're a sales enabled platform. If you, I'd love to maybe double click into the pivots and the path ahead. What roles those pivots had. Maybe if you could talk a bit about, especially what the balance is between, finding the focus and pivoting, and finding that balance. Share your own anecdotes, examples on how you all did that. Would love to hear as you scale and go to market.
Oh, sure. So I think first of all, thank you so much. And next time, I think I'll not come on a panel when there are eminent people like Dharmesh and Anand. Don't have much to add, right? So, but I'll do my bit in the sense like whatever I learned. So I think a lot of things are already said, and I think I learned it by experience. So what I think Dharmesh and Anand shared. So I think I'll just share like a couple of things that worked in our favor. So first, on a lighter note, is like this is all we knew, like what to do. Like we had no other options to work on anything else. So I think we were very focused. We knew that we had to build a B2B company, and we are talking about 8 to 10 years back when, I mean, this was not the norm, right? One thing that we day one we focused when I was in my B school, they said like the competition for an airlines is not other airlines. It is all about the different technology, which is like your Zoom and those kind of things which we are seeing today, right? Which is getting played out. So we definitely realized like a little bit early that we are not, as in technology, we are not in the business of generating electricity. If you were to take an analogy, it is all about using technology to solve the problems. And what Dharmesh was talking about, increasing the TAM, right? Or what Anand was talking about, the tech intensity, right? So in a good or bad sense, but we kind of got that right, that we are here just to solve a business problem, right? Because technology is just an enabler. Because many times what happens as a founder, you fall in love with your technology or the problem that you are solving. I mean, in the technical problem and not the customer problem. So thankfully, on our principle was let's keep finding the right problem to solve, right? And then in some sense, we always wanted to be in a larger term, because your chances of survival always increases when you are selling to the right kind of person with decision making power and in a large TAM, right? Because if you are playing in a 500 million TAM versus a 50 billion TAM, that definitely changes your chances of survival, success, and the outcome, right?
Yeah.
And then one thing that we always do is in B2B, I think you have to really look for the macro trends. So every year we don't have this kind of reports coming out, but we will sit together and figure out what is the 3-4 year big trends we are seeing in the market, like really big trends, how things will change, what is the buyer behavior, what are the things changing in enterprise, and that's how it will work, right? And last thing that we thankfully did was we are really trying to solve that bigger problem in TAM and not really going by the flavor of the season, right? Like where VCs are investing, like because when we were there, then commerce was hot, and then there was a lot of this logistics were hot. I mean, we have gone through a lot of seasons, and now right now SaaS is hot, right? So we were like, we'll still stick to our guns, right? But talking about our journey in a very brief way, so we started as a treasure hunt platform. We did not know what sales means, right? And while it was good, we were getting a one-time, $50 from HR users. Realized the TAM is very small, not scalable, no subscription business, doesn't work. So cool. So let's move to the next one. So then we started, and gamification was a big trend. Companies got funded like hundreds of millions of dollars. So we tried that and we created a gamification platform. We realized that this is a vitamin, this is not a painkiller. Okay, move on, right? So then we moved into, I mean, the good part is we were using a area that we understood, a problem that we understood, but we were trying to find the right market. Then we moved into all employees, realized that the CHRO and CLO don't have so much power and they are not so much forward looking, right? Okay, so moved on. And then we figured out that in B2B, there is a big advantage. There is a little bit secret that everybody says, go and talk to your customers, this, that. In B2B, the advantage is we went to LinkedIn, because in LinkedIn, in job description, companies pour their heart out. What is their problem that they are solving? So if whatever business you are doing, you can find that profile and you can see what companies expect this person to be successful. So one of my favorite topic is I go and look at LinkedIn jobs. I mean, that is my favorite pastime. I just keep looking at LinkedIn jobs because that's how things evolve, right? And that is where the companies are really telling your problem, right? And then only thing you have to do is just solve that problem, right? In B2B, it's that simple, right? Because people know it. So that's where we started moved, and we realized that sales enablement is becoming interesting because people are talking about a productivity problem and the tools were not right. And that's where we pivoted again. And that was a good thing. And we were in mid market. And that's where I thankfully was lucky enough that I got good mentors. I got Jyoti Bansal from like App Dynamics, which was that time the unicorn, right? 2016. And he connected me to Battery and Neeraj, and I attended a lot of their conferences. And it was all about, they were saying that every company is going to become a software company. And that is what stuck to me. And Jyoti pushed me. Like, if you are going to be only successful in Silicon Valley, you will get a lot of mentions. Everybody will talk about you, but you are not going to make a billion-dollar company if you are not in the East Coast. If you are not selling to the remotest bank, to the insurance company, because these are the companies which will pay you $1 billion. They will not get you into the limelight. So we started from mid-market to enterprise. And then now, as we are seeing, the market, as what even Dharmesh mentioned, and the kind of focus that Microsoft is bringing, technology is like really changing the landscape. What that means is you have to be always agile. You cannot, I mean, it has become more like a consumer market, even in B2B. So you have to be always understanding what is the landscape, the challenges that your customers are facing, the new technologies coming up. But anyways, I'll pause with that. So I think you have to be always on your toes, always looking at the customer problem and how dynamics will change. And hopefully you are right 8 out of 10 times, but you have to constantly iterate and figure out where do you want to go.
Right. Look, Krishna, I think that was very interesting. I think two things that I want to touch upon. One is you talked about LinkedIn, and in one sense, you almost articulated the Microsoft IC memo, before they make a decision, why they found it so helpful. So that's interesting. I think it's about pivots and paths. I think you talked about mentors, and we'll come back to that later. What we see is one of the biggest tasks for founders is to actually know what you know and what you don't know, and then find the people to partner. So that's really interesting. I wanted to just double click on, how do you, as you're scaling, Krishna, how do you decide? You're interacting with a lot of mentors, a lot of smart people, in that sense. And ultimately, to use the analogy, you're the master chef at the end of the day, right? You've got to come up with this recipe, and you have a lot of ingredients. How did you decide, as you were scaling, as you were hiring a VP of sales, let's say you listen to 2-3 really smart people who have done that before, and what's your advice to founders on how you piece that together? Did you develop your own framework? Did you listen to did you mirror that? Maybe some examples, and just double click into this GTM aspect, right? Like getting from maybe not the 0 to 10, but the 10 to the next stage, 10 to 50.
So I think for at least most of the startups that are coming out of India, I feel that at least in B2B, this is going to be one of the major roadblock, right? Which I think we have made a lot of mistakes, and it has taken some time, because this is the first time we are breaking a lot of barriers, right? Because the biggest problem is there are multiple problems that we are seeing. That one is you are actually getting into a different culture. SMB sales is still okay because people are buying and all those kind of things. When you're selling people, because when HubSpot came and everybody thought inbound marketing, outbound is dead. Unfortunately, that is not true. Outbound still exists, right? So when you start in India and then you get into a different culture, so one is really understanding those cultural changes and how do you get there. And second part is, most of the people in India come from an engineering mindset that is a very logical mindset, and sales and marketing is a very different kind of mindset. So how do you hire those kind of people? So that is where I think if you can really get to some good board members or get to some good advisors who have been there, done that, right? Who can interview for you, or where you can like really take some of the help. Because what India is right now missing is that referral network. Like in India, for example, we can still find connections and make things happen, right? And we have built some talent around e-commerce and those kind of things. Israel has at a lot of advantage because they have got 400 executives ready or 500 executives. You start in Israel, and like within a week or two, they will arrange everything. You will get a VP of sales, you will get a VP of marketing. I mean, and these are tried, tested people. So I'm not really worried. And in India, when you are starting up, there's a big problem. You don't know people there, right? So there will be a time when these things will get done. But that is where you have to learn from your mistakes. And generally, it takes a while to get those people right. But getting the right kind of advisors, and the few things, other things you can add is, we still believe that, oh, we do only know product sales and marketing, only people in US will know. But as a founder or as your team, you have to trust yourself. You have to be in the process to you really figure out the sales motion. You cannot really hand over the keys. I mean, you have to find a balance between being, hiring people and not micromanaging them, versus giving the keys only once they really know the thing. So it's challenging. It's cultural, it's hiring, it's when do you figure out that you have got the motion? So it's a little bit of trick. It's a little bit of tricky things, but I believe that as and when we get, like now, this 20-30 companies, we've got a network out there. When we get these, like for example, Battery was mentioning they want to come to India, like, so those kind of networks where people have been there, done that, those kind of things will make this much more scalable, especially in B2B.
Right. Very interesting. And you've literally done that, from Pune to Palo Alto, right? In that corridor. One thing I just wanted to say, that sparked a reaction was you said that this is a very esteemed group of panelists, and you weren't sure what you were being on here. I'll say that Dharmesh and I, we wouldn't exist if it weren't for startup founders. And you're also the one that keep Microsoft and other enterprises on their toes, right? To keep on innovating. So you're the center of this, Krishna.
Absolutely. You keep us in business.
Anand, I wanted to come back to you. We've talked in the past about partnerships, right? And this whole panel is about creating those partnerships. And 2020 really brought partnerships to the fore in one sense. You've talked about a partner first philosophy. If you can dive a bit deeper into that, and also I know you all have a value chain. It mirrors almost like the way we look at it. Early stage, growth stage, unicorn. If you can share a bit about that and what startups can expect, when they're partnering with Microsoft.
No, great question, and again, something that I'm personally quite passionate about. Microsoft is a partner-led company, and this is a unique thing about us. And now, in the beginning, when we were trying to sell the cloud, it also kind of came in the way because our partners at the time were not ready, and we were maybe competing with a model that was more direct sales. But I think the growth rates show now, when you're with a strong partnership network, once you get something going, it scales very fast. And that's what is happening for Microsoft today at a commercial cloud. Today, as you know, Sanjay, we are the largest in the world, and now growing at a consolidated basis faster if you take the weighted average of the next two. So if you really look at why that is happening, it's a very strong partner network that is one of the key enablers of that success of the commercial cloud, which is roughly about a $60 billion now in 2020. So why did that happen, and how do we work with the partners? I think number one, it's the range of partners that we work with, and that kind of becomes a network effect in the way our partner ecosystem works. We work with all the advisories, we work with all the tech companies, we work with all the GSIs, we work with a very large number of ISVs who are the small independent software vendors who are growing their businesses. And to bring that together, now we are working with a number of partners for skilling. Today, we are making sure that the digital skills are at the highest levels across the entire ecosystem. Now, when you bring that whole mix together and you make this partner ecosystem itself interact with each other, the network effect helps everyone grow. So that fundamentally is also a big part of who we are. We are an indirect ecosystem, much more than a direct ecosystem. The second, I think if I just go to your second question a little bit as to how do we think about the whole journey of a startup, and how do we bring a lot of that capability in different points in time. I'll go back to a little bit what Krishna was saying. Hey, listen, I don't need just capital. I need the right talent. I need the right network. I need customers. I need sales and marketing skills. I need different kinds of skills. Now, that's, but as Krishna spoke, I was saying there's still a lot more of the go-to-market side that he was referring to. So if you look at how we even think about the journey of a startup, when we first meet a startup, if the startup is at, let's say, either early stage or the growth stage or the unicorn stage, and let me tell you across the three, how do we work? At the early stage, we'll really engage with the startup with two of our very structured arms, which is the M12 Ventures, as well as the Microsoft for Startups. And now increasingly in many parts of the world, we have a startup pod that can coordinate this journey. So that becomes the entry point, because at that point in time, the startup is looking for maybe capital, maybe some amount of an ecosystem to just start their work. As soon as the startup moves into the growth stage, we actually bring in our engineering to accelerate the startup. We also bring our go-to-market muscle, where now you take these two things, go-to-market muscle of Microsoft, and you bring the engineering in. We have amongst the best engineering talent on the planet as part of Microsoft. We actually then work with startups and say, hey, you don't need to build everything. You can actually take a lot of this engineering capability directly from us and plug it in, and therefore accelerate your product dev in a very, very different manner. So therefore, the speed at which you continuously scale your MVP is very, very high when you work with our engineering team. And the second bit around the whole go-to-market side, the largest enterprise tech sales force on the planet is with Microsoft. We are calling on almost every enterprise company, small company on the planet, government, non-profit. We're calling on all of them. And therefore, if we provide our go-to-market muscle to a startup who's going and selling into the B2B world around the planet, if you're sitting in Pune and you want to sell in Palo Alto, or you want to sell in London, or you want to sell in Seoul, or you want to go to Sydney or Tokyo, at all over the place, we can make sure that you can find a seller to do that simultaneously the day you come on board. So essentially, this whole go-to-market muscle that we have got it configured is a very big part of the value prop that we bring at that growth stage for the startup, because you're looking for customers. You got your MVP done, you're looking for customers. Now, after you do that and you become an enterprise, a unicorn, sorry. At least my experience is when you're at that unicorn stage, you no longer are fully a startup. You have started exhibiting the characteristics of an enterprise company. You need processes. You need a lot more sort of different sets of people who've not really met with each other and working together. All of that is beginning to happen when you're becoming a unicorn. And there again, I think Microsoft's unique model of serving an enterprise comes into play. So we bring our entire enterprise sort of management portfolio to this unicorn. And therefore, while the startup remains with Microsoft in its journey, it's getting very different treatment in its early stage, in its growth stage, and the unicorn stage in scaling their business and creating in a big way. And we've seen that happen with multiple companies in India and globally, as in, you know about InMobi and iCert is great examples. We're beginning to do that with Pixel. So there's a lot of good work that we are seeing now with the portfolio, and I see a lot of opportunity as we go ahead.
Really interesting. I mean, a lot of common patterns in our playbooks. And Dharmesh, let me just come to you. In terms of a time check, what we'll do is we'll spend about 10 minutes amongst us, and then we'll open up to questions, because I see there are a number of participants. Dharmesh, just picking up on what Anant was saying. From our perspective, we wanted to be a unicorn first before an enterprise picks it up. So you get unicorn stage and then the enterprise stage. Dharmesh, from your vantage point in the Valley, you had some great successes there, right? I mean, you're seeing Datadog and Snowflake. And would love for you to double click in what is India's position, right? I mean, what we are seeing is we're seeing a lot of your friends and peers, including yourself, reach out to us and saying, hey, we hadn't really looked at India earlier, but now you mentioned some of the names. We're on the map. Freshworks, our own Krishna here at Mindtickle is all there. And they, you've got Postman, and they all want to come in and take a really early look. What do you think is what has changed? What's our position? And also, we'll talk a bit about growth, right? The whole T2, D3, triple twice, and then double three times to become a unicorn to hit 100 million revenues. If you can share some examples, how Dhruva grew, how Postman, bottom up, top down, would love to hear.
Yes, there's a couple questions. I'll try to unpack them. And, look, I'm surprised that India hasn't proliferated on the global B2B scene as much as Israel or, Europe have. And we get to see this firsthand. I have 6 companies that are in UK, Belgium, Israel. And I think it's very important what Krishna mentioned, which is the raw potential is still there. You got to develop the network, right? So what do I mean by that? There's no reason why, software engineers sitting in Bangalore can create an API company that can sell to JP Morgan Chase. For that matter, they've done it. It's called Postman, right? So there's 6 million developers out of the global 30 million developers that sit in India, much more than the US market, right? So the raw potential is there. There's probably more Indian founders in our kind of enterprise portfolio than non-Indian founders. So there's clearly potential. Now there's a market in India where you can go, try out your product with, Flipkart or some of the other tech-enabled companies and get some early traction, right? And I think COVID has been a great kind of enabler, and it's kind of democratized access, because if I'm sitting across a Zoom session from a founder in India, it's no different than sitting across somebody in San Francisco for that matter, right? People have become comfortable dealing with Zoom and having global teams, right? So I think the fact that there's $2 trillion in IT spending, which is all up for grabs as things move to cloud, API, microservices, data, and the fact that there's 5-6 million developers who are increasingly latching onto open source and cloud native, building companies in India. I mean, there's supply, there's demand, and there's history of doing this. Israel has 7 million population, and it still has more B2B software startups than India. So I think the missing link is 2 things. One is proof points, and second is the network. The more proof points there are of companies like Dhruva and Postman and Freshworks and Mindtickle that cross the chasm and go to the US and kind of prove success, the more that enables companies, right? So I'm already seeing that even in your portfolio, Sanjay, we are seeing more companies that are starting from the ground up, and when they get to 2, 3, 5 million in ARR, they're saying, hey, what about I put these seeds in the ground in the US market, right? So that's one thing. You need a data point. And second, you need a network of people to help you with that, right? When Israeli companies move to the US, there are specific firms that are focused on getting you the first VP of sales, the first 3 sales guys, the VP of marketing, the community development person, VP of engineering, and there's a friendly network of CIOs, CISOs, VPs of engineering who can buy from you. So that network exists. So if you are an Israeli startup with approved product market fit and like 1 or 2 million in ARR, you can raise your hand and like 10 firms will give you the money, help you make the movement, for everything from filing a visa to getting your first 10 customers in the US. There's a network that exists. That same network needs to be developed in the Indian market. And most of the Indian VCs we know have been focused on the local market in India as opposed to hopping the pond. So that's the reason why we got really interested, saying, why can't we replicate a JFrog or a Gong or Dataiku or Datadog that came out of France? Right. All these companies, there's no reason why we can't have 5 to 10x as many companies coming out of India and selling to the US market, as long as we have advisors. And I'm sure Krishna is going to be advising a bunch of companies over time from his journey. And we hope to kind of build that platform to help you on ramp and get access to go-to-market talent as well as customers when you make that transition, right? So that's number one. And I think you brought up a couple of data points. You mentioned, Postman versus Dhruva. I think these are very different businesses. Or you took Datadog versus, Okta for that matter. And there's multiple paths to success, right? There's no reason every company should be bottoms up or tops down. You'd really have to match your business strategy to the customer buying journey, right? So what do I mean by that? If we look at a Postman, they're selling to a developer a way to create APIs and test APIs, right? They're selling to 30 million developers who can swipe their credit card and pay $10 a month, right? They don't need to invest in a $300,000 a year enterprise sales executive, because it's likely the customer doesn't even want to talk to that guy, right? So In their case, the strategy is much more product-led, product-oriented, investing heavily in the product for the product to be self-service and building a community around it. And that can get them to 100 million, right? So we have this company, JProg. They didn't have the first enterprise sales executive until they went public. Mm-hmm. So you can just sell to developers, departments, practitioners, and your investments are heavily focused on product investment. And that's actually a great levelizer because it's easier for you to sell to a developer sitting at, Amazon in the US or to a developer sitting at, Flipkart in India. They're all the same. They'll swipe $10 a month and they're good to go. That's an easier business to transition to the US, right? Then there's a top-down business. You look at Okta. Okta is a $35 billion company, or Druva, it's a couple hundred million, I think, in revenue. Right. There, the buyer is not the developer. The buyer is an enterprise CIO or enterprise chief security officer. Security, governance, core IT still tends to be top-down because somebody's responsible for the enterprise-wide standard. There, you have to invest a lot more in go-to-market early on in the cycle, right? So if that's the audience you're selling to, you need to invest in an enterprise team, a marketing and SDR team early on in the cycle, and not necessarily just on the product because it's important to kind of curate that process with the buyer. And those companies tend to invest more heavily in sales and marketing early in the cycle, right? They'll hire the first 3 sales guy when they have, not even 300K in revenue, and you have to scale your go-to-market motion. You make up for that because once you get into a large company, you can have a higher lifetime value. So you justify the upfront investment with higher lifetime value. But that's a very different business model. And that one needs more of the network of go-to-market executives for an Indian company to transition to the US. So I think for Druva to come to the US market, they needed much more help, which I'm sure the Nexus guys provided to them. They're excellent at doing this. And so, I think there's a different ways to success. But, if you look at Datadog and Okta, they're both $30-40 billion companies, right? So there's multiple paths to success. You just want to match your business strategy with the customer buying journey and invest in the product or go-to-market motions based on what's right for your business. And there's no reason why, there shouldn't be 5 to 10x the number of companies in India going both of those routes. So, hopefully when they're ready, they'll come to us.
Ramesh, this is fantastic. In one sense, while there's so much success and so much traction and growth in Silicon Valley, or rather in the US, we're also seeing this renewed interest in India, right? So it's really encouraging for ecosystem. Krishna, we are all founder first, but I'm going to give you the last question here, and then we'll open up to questions. You're in everything about startup culture is, on one hand, playbooks and replicating and improving the odds of success. And on the other hand, it's about breaking the rules, and really there are no playbooks, right? So, I would love to get your advice, even for us as investors or stakeholders and for founders out there, on what are those parameters as you're growing that we should be challenging, that you yourself challenge. Like, for example, people say, okay, you are based in Pune, so it must be the product. You must be the product guy or the hub, engineering hub, right? And somebody is based in Palo Alto is by necessity the customer-facing person. Building playbooks, building a SaaS community. Maybe just share some examples on what has worked for you all, and just how you would encourage, where you would push, encourage founders to push the envelope on as you're growing for growth.
No, absolutely. It's a great question. And I think Dharmesh already alluded to it, right? So one thing that has changed, and I think we should all acknowledge, is like the word is actually, genuinely like changing, like what it was in 2015, it is not the same in 2020, right? The dynamics are changing. So one thing that historically we have seen that, people try to, at least in the B2B, they try to put a playbook, right? Whether it is investors or, entrepreneurs. The moment you get a funding or something like that, we generally try to put a playbook. We try to find a formula. What is the closest one? The reality is no one knows it, right? You will have to find your own journey. Like, I think that is what is becoming very interesting, which I think Dharmesh also mentioned, right? Like whether it is a Dhruva or a Postman. So I think just trying to force fit yourself, you are bound for failure, right? Don't try to say, you can learn from all the other experiences that you see, but be honest to yourself. Like, because, for example, I tried to make an Freshworks will be a disaster because, we are more consultative, we build complex softwares. So I think for us, the best place is enterprise B2B. Like, even if we want to or whatever, like because, we are trying to replicate that, oh, this is what has worked in India, let's do that, right? So you have to constantly challenge things. we tried to build a sales software, and everybody was saying like, oh, you guys have never done even sales, so how can you build a sales software, right? And today we are consulting some of the top CROs, some of the names that Dharmesh mentioned, all of them are customers. Like, so these are the companies, the largest cloud company in the world. Sorry, Anand, like, but one of them is also like building their entire sales team on us. So you have to challenge the status quo. Like, I have never done any sales before I started Mindtical, right? And now we are consulting the entire world on how to do sales. So, I mean, just challenge the status quo and get things done. Everybody says like, for example, oh, we have to go to Silicon Valley. But if you are building companies, I believe East Coast will be the new hub, because that is the practical way of building businesses, because the time zones and overlaps and those kind of things, right? So whatever things you are doing, like many times you say, oh, you are going to US, like just hire this VP of salesperson, has done things there. No, you have to figure out that what is your sales motion, right? So there are a lot of those things where being honest, knowing your own pulse, you can take a lot of advice from everyone. I mean, I'm not denying that. I'm not saying like be a rebel, but all I'm just saying is there's an originality and then there's a copycat, and there is a reality somewhere in this today's world which you have to find out.
Yeah. Anand will be happy to know that whatever you learned about go-to-market and sales, you learned at Microsoft. So he'll be happy with that. Just go ahead, Anand. Sorry.
No, just saying, very happy to see the work that Krishna is doing, and Pune is very close to my heart. So awesome to see it happening from Pune.
No, fantastic. I'm just in the interest of time. If we have about 15 minutes, I had one or two questions where we want to bring in the audience. I'm just going to request my colleague Jitesh, who is part of our platform team, who heads ecosystem and partnerships. Jitesh, if you could just come on and maybe we can start looking at the audience questions.
Sure. Absolutely, Sanjay. Thanks a lot, Krishna and Dharmesh, for the wonderful session. So we'll kick off with a couple of questions. In fact, asked by one of our dear friends, Sanjay, Manish from Waterbridge, who I'm just going to bring up as a panelist. So, Manish, once that happens,
you can just put a video of you cutting in and out, but yeah, just bring Manish if you can.
Yeah, I think Manish is here. Manish, it'll be great if you can have your video on and do.
Hi, Manish. Go ahead.
Sanjay, what a fantastic panel! What the stuff you guys are doing since 2 days ago, amazing. Dharmesh, good to see you. I think I saw you last in Hawaii 5 or 6 years ago. The alliance we were there.
Right, good to see you.
Definitely hasn't lasted, but the world has moved on to better things. I'll keep it directed at you. I have a question for Dharmesh and one for Krishna. I don't know if there's time for both, but Dharmesh, real quick, look, people like Sanjay and me and our teams who are trying to find the gems, the next Postman and the next Dhruva from India. If you put your battery hat and a Series B plus hat, if I may say so, right? What are the one or two areas structurally you think Indian global SaaS companies would be better at vis-a-vis a company that's just based in the US, got nothing to do with India?
Yeah, look, I think anything to do with developer software. I mean, India has such a strong history in software development, first as services firms, and then as product firms, and then as large, internet companies were built out there. That when I look at the software development ecosystem, from the way software is built to the way it's launched to the way it's tested and updated, that just seems like a natural kind of domain for, India's ecosystem to spring up companies. And that entire industry is in massive shift right now. When people move to the cloud, they aren't lifting and shifting legacy applications. They're rewriting the way software is written, maintained, deployed, distributed, right? So that seems to be a natural area for Indian companies to focus on. That's not to say you can't build, analytics or data-oriented software companies, if you will. But like Israel is really good in security because everybody goes through the 8200 and they get their experience, building security software. So they have a natural inclination towards that. In much the same way, India has such a rich history of software development that as new architectures and new frameworks are being built, I would have hoped, and I still hope to see many companies in that ecosystem, in addition to some others. But I think that seems to be an area where you have an edge. And when we look at companies at a Series B, right, what I'm looking for obviously is applicability to the US market. We don't have expertise in helping you scale to the Indian market. There's plenty of people that know that well. But when it comes to scaling your software to the US market, be it top down or bottoms up, that's an area we're really interested in, have a rich history of doing that across Europe, Israel, going to US. So I want to replicate the same. And then you look for those companies, if it's top down, you're looking for, repeatability across 10, 20 customers and, 3 to 5 million in ARR selling to some large companies. And then you can scale that in the US market. But if it's a bottoms up company, I'm much more focused on usage, or if you're selling API development software, do you have, 10, 20,000 kind of free downloads and users of your platform? I don't really care if they're paying you, 2, 3 million or not, but is the usage strong and are you seeing an uptake in weekly, daily usage and engagement, right? Because once you have that, then you can get the right scaling effort to go penetrate, millions of developers. So based on the type of company you have, I'm really looking for repeatability and some early product market fit, which we can then help scale. Because this whole playbook of going from 3 to 10 to 100 to now 1 billion, we've seen that a few times in our 35 years of operating history, and we can help replicate that if I can find a company that has that early product market fit, either top down or bottoms up. And of course, goes without saying, kind of strong mentors and early investors like you and Sanjay, you being involved and kind of making sure your companies are focused on that direction is always helpful. Because I don't have to come in and tell them, go back to ground zero and get them to build there. You guys are already guiding these companies. We can help take it from there and scale to the US market. So does that answer your question?
You did. Very insightful. Thank you. I'm so glad you didn't say things like a certain ARR number or certain ACV and NRR. I mean, it was very insightful.
No.
Hitesh,
you have time for the next one as well.
Right?
You have time for the next one as well, Manish. Please go ahead.
Perfect. Oh, thank you. Thanks, Ramesh. Krishna, I have a question for you. In your congratulations on MindTicker's amazing journey. I've been watching it from a distance, and I am a cheerleader from the sidelines. Was there one inflection point in your journey where you felt like you arrived in the global scene? And the question is more directed to younger entrepreneurs in the SaaS space. Is there that North Star metric or some inflection point, at least from your journey? Share that with us. Thanks.
I think there were actually two inflection points that happened, so at least in the enterprise B2B. So one was, which Dharmesh just mentioned about repeatability, right? So in 2015, when we came out with sales readiness, so the whole idea is, and one good thing that as founders, we had this belief is go big or go home, right? We are not building or trying to make a sustainable company. The idea was we have to make a global company. That was the given. So I think when we launched the sales readiness platform, today talking about sales stack is easy. 2015, nobody believed in it. There was a CRM. Anything you take to an investor, they will say, oh, you are building a CRM and why will Salesforce not build it? That was the standard question you will get, right? So that is where we said, if there is a real problem, we said we will target that time the only top 20 fastest growing startup. We'll go to that TechCrunch or whatever that list. And if the CEOs give us a meeting, then I think we are done. Then we have solved some problem. So proud to say that within 6 months, not only we got the meetings, but almost we converted all of them, AppDynamics, Nutanix, Qualtrics, MongoDB, CrowdStrike. You name it, every single company was working on our platform on a company that they'd never heard of it, right? So an Indian product company selling to US and the CEOs trusted it. So we realized that, okay, this is one thing that, okay, the companies are ready if you're solving the right problem. And it was not this India-US bias. That was the first point where we knew that, okay, we are doing something which is global and maybe more US and less India, right? And then the second inflection point is, which again I mentioned earlier, that when I was very happy, I walked into, Jyoti Bansal and just said, I've got $100,000 deal and from this customer and I've got 20 tech customers in Silicon Valley and Palo Alto. And I was like, fine, big deal. Because this is a place where everybody's selling to everybody, right? So I'll consider that you are really becoming an enterprise company if you get me a deal from the East Coast. And that was I don't know what to do. I don't know what to talk outside technology. And then I think our second inflection point happened when we made 1 or 2 large deals in non-tech and East Coast. And that is where I think we realize that at least, I mean, we're not arrived, we are still arriving, like, but I mean, the whole point is that you knew that this is a global company, you are figured out a product market fit, the TAM is really large, and you need to accelerate. And then obviously, then there has been a strong journey which is going around.
Thank you. That's very helpful. And congratulations, Sanjay, Jitesh, and the team for Blume 10 years. Awesome job.
Thank you, Manish. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Manish. I'm going to move you back to the attendee list. Thanks a lot. I had a follow-up question to what Manish asked to Krishna, and maybe I'd love Anant to chime in here as well. Krishna, you mentioned interestingly about the East Coast dynamics, right? Can you elaborate? And I'm just curious, both the next founder and for the founders in the audience, are there any 2-3 main differences that you have seen between selling from the East and the West Coast? That's one. And I'd love to add a layer of the partnership layer to this. So maybe Anand, you can give the same example from the other side. Are you also seeing at least maybe potentially some examples in the global context, how a partner could help accelerate some of this? Because I think the need to try and understand when to have a partner like Microsoft is a very tricky question. So just trying to combine the two and get some insights on this.
I'll share my perspective on both of them and would love Anand's input because we have made that mistake. So I think I'll share those inputs. So I think the reason I say that we have to think differently is what really works with Israel is also one of the another thing. A direct flight, 12 hours, people can literally go back and forth. So another thing, see, remember the first wave was the services company. So you'll have your salespeople, the products are here, and you can just outsource. Like US was the HQ, India was the back office, right? And then you got the second wave of companies where India is the market, India is the place, or you are selling SMB, where everything is here and you are doing remote sales, right? So it's still okay. When you're developing a B2B company, you have to think of a global company. You cannot have one thing. Like you cannot be at one place. That is the reality, right? I mean, and you will have to like really juggle around the world, right? So, and now what you're really looking, if you're really building a great product out of here, and if you're making, so then you really want more sales talent and what kind of talent you're looking at, right? So more sales and go-to-market talent and where your customers lie. So East Coast, for example, for that matter, there's enough talent and there's a good overlap. You get at least 4 to 6 hours to work together. Otherwise, it starts becoming a challenge. So that is where I think, and also we know, like, I mean, there are like a lot of new areas which are emerging. Texas is emerging, Atlanta is emerging. So I mean, I personally believe that with all this COVID, I think when you look at US, you might have to have a fresh pair of eyes. And maybe there are people in non-Bay Area which are more willing to work and like more talent sitting out there again. So that is one part. On partnerships, I think Anant mentioned is right. Like when you're scaling B2B companies, I think yes, at a certain point you need to have the partnership arm because that really brings the scale. I think the right time is when you have figured out a product market fit and you know how to sell, because then only you can enable them and give that formula, or you have to give the formula. You cannot ask them to create the formula for you. I think we were a little bit late on this one, but I think I'll encourage that once they feel that they've got a formula and they've got some repeatability, partnerships is something that people should explore.
Great points, Krishna, and I'll just build on that. Jitesh, thank you for taking that follow-up question. And I would say first let me go to that example of West Coast, East Coast. If you just look at the Microsoft business in the US, we've got 8 geographies. So it's not just about just the southern West Coast or the upper West Coast and the northern East Coast or the southern East Coast. And there's lots in the middle. And I think as soon as we see a success happen in our go-to-market play for a B2B portfolio, we are able to then make sure that packaged sales process and that option is available to thousands of enterprise sellers across those 8 businesses, not just in the United States, but also in Europe and also in Asia. And therefore, people can start saying, hey, listen, this is how this works. Now, do you have a customer, an enterprise customer here who could use this? And therefore the sales signal or the demand funnel signal starts coming from very, very different places. And wherever you suddenly say, hey, listen, there are about 10 inquiries coming from this particular area, we can then easily work with that ISV company and say, listen, first, of course, show up to go talk to those 10, but very quickly and plant 2 or 3 permanent people in that area so that they can keep picking up more demand and keep going and closing those sales. Because in our business model, we don't become the closing part of the sales. The closing part of the sales is still with the startup company, but it's the initiation with the funnel, which is the toughest one to create, and we are able to scale that fairly quick. And once the sale happens, then continuing to work with that customer and providing ongoing customer support and so on again becomes a very big part of the partnership. In the way we work with them, because that becomes core to that customer's tech fabric. So those are two aspects around how we work. One thing I would differ a little bit in how Krishna said it. I think there are definitely great examples of how product market fit lands right the first time, but in my experience, it evolves. Over a period of time, you do it with a few customers, and then you evolve, and then you do more with others, and there's a lot more engineering, rework, etc. that you need. Also, if you're unlucky, you lose some tech people in between, and some of your IP may walk out of the door, and therefore, how do you continue to build at a fast pace and evolve it? That's where I think when we bring the engineering partnership to work with some of the startups, we are able to make sure that we de-risk them even on the tech development side. Yes, you need to have some sort of product market capability, but you can keep the evolution of that can become much faster with a partner.
Fantastic. Jitesh, I think we have time for one quick one.
I mean, that we're okay, I think, if you want to.
Yeah, let's do it quickly. Very good. So if you all can just spend a couple of minutes, I know it's short or a little over time, but Jitesh, let's be quick. Go ahead.
Sure. I'm just going to bring in Vikas. I think, Krishna, he's one of your friends as well. And Vikas, you can ask the question.
Hi, Krishna. Vikas here, common floor, sir. So I have had the privilege of talking to Krishna earlier during our common floor journey, and I did very distinctly remember I think India was the first market that you had started from, and if you could highlight that whole pain and transition from India to US market, that could be really helpful for people here.
So I think this will probably require a lot of time. So maybe you can I'll sync up in detail. But the summary is that I think India and US are different markets, right? Because the buying behavior, the way people do, like other than those kind of journeys which are self-serve, like the postman or SMB, then I think it can be different. But I think if you're doing B2B proper, like either mid-market to enterprise, then I think you have to really understand the US market, their expectations from product. And when you're selling there, it is not only product. You actually have to bring the entire company, like product, support, solutions, services. Because I mean, the difference between B2B companies, you no longer sell a product. I mean, you sell a solution. So with that mindset, I think you need to build the company and completely orient yourself around bringing that problem solving things to that customer. So that means what it does is it's not only marketing, but marketing, support, sales, and understanding the customer language. So there's a lot of those things which you need to bring together. So just being successful in India doesn't guarantee that you'll be successful in US. In fact, it's the other way around. That sometimes, I mean, these are very distinct geographies. So you have to really pick your battle. And you can always do some experiments to figure out and build something around it. But then when you launch in US, you may not rinse and repeat the formula. You have to rebuild it. Thank you.
Thank you, Vikas. Good to see you.
Thanks,
so, just to wrap up, I know we've crossed the hour. From Blume, we wanted to thank all of you. A very complimentary and very interesting panel. Dharmesh, thanks for joining us in your morning. Your friend Jai Das, I believe, was also listening to this, and he's going to join us in about half an hour because we have
That's right.
the next panel coming up. Anand, thanks for coming in. Always a pleasure to see you talking about startups. And Krishna, it was again too short, very candid, and I want to say, and I'll say this: I think what is a fantastic quality to all founders when asked me is that if you can be really growth oriented and extremely determined on one hand, yet be absolutely humble on the other, it's fantastic. It's a very rare quality, and Krishna, you have that. It's fantastic to see you. I just wanted to share the next panel is in about 25 minutes from now. Jitesh, if anything more to share on that, maybe just a quick announcement.
Yeah, absolutely. No, thanks, Sanjay. I think one of the interesting things that came out of this was talking about the consumerization and the change of stakeholders who are buying B2B solutions. And I think the next panel is very, very relevant for that. So would love for you guys to join in as well. It happens in 25 minutes. With Jedas of Sapphire Ventures, Tony Wang, who's the co-founder of Agora, and Asad, who's one of the co-founders of Namatest. So thanks. Just wanted to mention that. Thanks again, Dharmesh, Krishna, and Anant for coming in.
Sure.
And,
Thank you, guys.
Thank you so much. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, guys. Nice to meet everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye.
Thanks everyone for joining in.